Good morning. I'm so super excited to be here with a new Speculative Solidarity video today. This is one that um, I have been thinking about since I started the series. And in fact, it's part of a much larger process for me of somatic training, especially around trauma. So today's episode, as it were, is Speculative Solidarity number 7, Neuroplastic Somatic Biohack. And that title is from this larger series of disruptor mechanisms that I teach. It's like a protocol for sort of reprogramming yourself for change. And you can actually find a lot of that right up in Tagwerk. It just came out. This episode will be sort of an introduction because one of the reasons that it took so long to make this particular video is because over the last 2 months, it's been growing and growing, and how much it needs to kind of include and what it would mean to do this video as sort of a capsule really eventually made me realize that it needed to be something longer. And so what I'm doing today is I'm kind of going to introduce the idea of the the biohack sort of somatic protocol for you. And then we'll talk about where you might be able to find more of it. So if you've been following this series, or even if you haven't, I'll sort of catch you up. We've been sort of talking about the ways in which through language, through institutions, through sort of large scale logics, and then through the body, how we as human animals really kind of are facing, especially now, not only sort of theoretical, conceptual things that we find really challenging, but that we're facing in ourselves sort of conflicts in what we might have the capacity to do in this time and perhaps in future if we're going to stick around here on this planet, regarding the ways in which we're able to actually put into motion the changes we'd like to make. And so I've been talking a lot about sort of, on the one hand, getting a little analytical, sort of understanding why it is that our minds and our bodies and work the way that they do, why we struggle with making certain changes, and et cetera. Sort of like the systemic reasons that we often feel or experience the things that we experience, how that happens through language, and then giving some tools for how you can start to like re-articulate that, like using language. And these are also sort of protocols. So a quick just administrative thing. This is, as usual, it's live when it happens on YouTube. I put them on IGTV. That's where most people will see it. If you're looking for captions, please go to YouTube. All of the captions are there. There will also be usually either a transcript or a written version also available on Medium. So this lives across all of those platforms and is archived. And it's connected to the rest of the series. So this particular one may become a longer series or a workshop. I've done a lot of workshops around this before, but I now have the opportunity to maybe do a longer workshop. And so if you're interested in that, please DM me or note in the comments. So the first thing that I wanted to say is that this particular little sort of introduction to the somatic biohack today will bring us back to things that we've talked about before, right? And the first one that's really important is that it will bring us back to the labor body, sort of the idea that through the capitalist system, you learn how to be a very particular type of body. And you've heard me say before, if you've been listening, that I differentiate between the idea of learning how to human, right? Which might mean like what it means to be in this particular type of body with its capacities, what it means to physically function in relationship to conceptual ideas, in relationship to others, in relationship to the world, and what side of skills and capacities we would need to build to do that well and effectively. And then what I would call how to institution, which is actually like how to utilize that body and have that body be trained to replicate things that are already happening in the world for certain purposes, right? To build money for people, to build power for people, etc. So when the institutions that we have lived in have really been constructed so that the way that we learn about our bodies replicates this system, it can be very confusing because the experience of that is as though it were natural, and yet it is not, right? And it's very hard for us to think about like ourselves as being this conditioned. And in fact, even the ones of us who've done a ton of work around recognizing that, we still are, right? So on the one hand, we'll talk a little bit about that today, and then also the idea about like articulation and like what it means to articulate something and how powerful that can be. And so in a way, articulating for yourself, having me articulate, working now with this conceptual new framework can really help you help us as humans, right? Start to kind of break down and erode the sort of ossification, like the stuckness of that programming, because bringing yourself new terminologies, new sort of frameworks within which you can see yourself can be really helpful. So I feel like this is going to get really long because I'm on like 6 minutes and we're still in the introduction to the introduction. So here we go. It's going to be a long video. So the first thing, I wrote this down today because I will go all over the place. I'm just really excited to talk about this. So the first thing I wanted to say, right? So as part of the process of reprogramming to make like larger system change, there needs to be a recognition that we really often cannot make that change. Like we can't participate in that change. We can't do it together without making certain changes, like all the way down in the somatic level of the body first. The body will not necessarily respond. It's not capacitous. It's been taught certain things and it needs to be retaught or untaught and unlearning, right? So in a way, it can be interesting to think about like the institutional learning that we've had as kind of living in our bodies. You can use the idea of like a computer metaphor for this, right? So if you think about your body as sort of hardware or a mainframe, something like that has physical materials, and that into those materials are written certain programs. So, the programs that we have told our operating system, have told our physical body, like how it functions, right? And in a way, it's hard for us to be both sort of system manager as well as system, right? And so it's hard for us often to see like, oh, this thing has been programmed in us, right? But so just like in a sort of software hardware situation, like that can be wiped, it can be programmed, it can also get a virus, right? So it can also, something can come into that system and corrupt it, right? And making it very difficult to understand like what it is that's going wrong, etc. And so if we think about like how to work with our mainframe and sort of clean it up and get it working, it helps for us to sort of like realize that we don't even necessarily even really understand how that physical hardware works. And if you were like a programmer or someone working in computers, like these sort of real basics around like how the system that you're learning how to use on a daily basis works would be like the most elementary thing that you would do before going farther on in that study. And yet with your body, like this has been really left up to chance. Not only has it left up to chance, but you've been discouraged from learning it, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the idea of like expertise and like who has the right and who should be telling you how your body works. Like when we have learned to distrust the self or trust someone else, and I'm not someone who's going to come in and be like, doctors are stupid, scientists are stupid. That's ridiculous. No, it isn't a either or situation. There are a lot of people who have dedicated their lives to care and to research and to all sorts of things, and that is fucking great. So just like, it's probably better to both understand how to read a map and be able to use Waze on your phone to get somewhere. It's the best of all possible worlds is to have both the traditional indigenous knowledge, both the traditional ways of dealing with the body, mind, and the new research. So these things working in tandem that really is like the height of what it means to like compound human intelligence, right? So, something to remember is that even when you're working with a specialist or a doctor, those doctors by and large are utilizing means, which is to say they're utilizing like statistics and tests that as best as they can find sort of like the through line that's the most common, but whose bodies are the most common? Everyone is, got really unusual characteristics. And so that fails a lot of the time. And so, like the way that we often like prescribe medication, it's sort of like, or thinking about like cancer treatment, you're often like killing off an enormous amount of other cells in order to like try to find this thing. It's like a minefield, right? And so, thinking about different ways that the body is conditioned, having to do with like epigenetics and trauma, psychological influences, it's really important to remember that like our bodies are extremely, extremely different. And you are the person, if paying the most attention, who has the most information about your body of anyone, right? And so it's important to understand that like pre the allopathic sort of ways of medicine that we're currently used to, and also still operating, there are other ways of thinking about the body that understand the body as really working as kind of a gradient of like being a container for energies in relationship with the world at large, in relationship with plants and animals, and both through eating as well as in other interactions, etc. So in homeopathy, for instance, like a symptom understood as manifesting by different people will be treated differently. Like you don't treat the symptom, you treat the person. So if I was to present a certain symptom and then someone else was to present a certain symptom, their analysis of you would be based on all sorts of factors having to do with like your life, your family, more not in the way that like your intake is in the medical office. We're talking about like, how do you feel when it's cold? Do you like spicy food? Like, have you had trauma in your life? Things that would change your programming in a way that wouldn't change someone else's. And then you would be treated with different medicine, right? With different treatments. So when we talk about the labor body, right, as well as the ways in which primarily Western Enlightenment thinking has created the institutional system that we were taught, we have to remember that we have learned to distrust the body, to abuse the body, to manipulate, ignore it, and also to largely be ignorant of it, which leaves us dependent on other people, which makes other people more powerful than we are, right? And so this analysis, talking about this, even though these words might sound academic, this is not an academic exercise. I have to stress that. We have really been taught that sort of, and this is something around sort of anti-intellectualism. We have been taught that book learning, the things that we talk about in school, that's for nerds. And the way we talk about that in our culture disabuses us of the idea that it's really super powerful to think in these ways and to go to the literature and go to various people who are working with these tools and who can help us, right? So so the disembodiment that we've been trained to have has massive implications, and it doesn't only have an implication for us individually. The really big implications of this are when exponentially all of our disembodiment is added to each other and we sort of as a collective body are disembodied. This is part of, I believe, the reason why we're so able to stay disconnected from some of the things that are happening in the world, because we have been trained to do so. And so not only are we doing so individually, but we're doing so as a collective. And once you start understanding the disembodiment and trauma of the collective, then you really start to get somewhere on what it would mean to rebuild individually and then as a group with these sorts of tools. So something that's great for us is that we have the ability to alter this programming, right? Because we have plasticity, which is to say we have the ability, we're mutable systems, we're mutable organisms, and we can relearn and unlearn. We like to talk about, or we hear about sort of the idea of neuroplasticity, but I think erroneously we then attach that to the brain, specifically the brain as if it was just sitting in your head and was this independently operating thing. Well, just like people aren't independently operating things, and neither are plants or animals or mushrooms, or whatever, we're operating as sort of an assemblage. And I'm thinking about Anna saying all the time, so like that's where I am. But your brain is not your brain, your intelligence, the nervous system, the limbic system. This really, like, how you're operating and where your intelligence is stored is all over your body, right? And so that plasticity is happening everywhere, in relationship to your muscles, in relationship to your blood, in relationship to your bones, which are soft, by the way. They're not like, you don't even think about them the way that they actually are operating. So if we understand sort of like the nervous system and the brain, and the intelligence of the body as kind of a supercomputer, it helps to understand that, like, that machine intelligence, that intelligence of your system is in every single cell of you, and also is in constant conversation with everything around you. And so this process of what I'm calling like somatic biohack is an invitation to start to work on that reprogramming, start to understand your system's parts, and to really agentively feel the capacities of your organism, which are great, like unlike any other thing that's living on the planet. Right. So in Feldenkrais's 1972 Awareness Through Movement, he writes that the human has both the extraordinary opportunity, given to no other animal, to build up a body of learned responses, and the special opportunity to go wrong. I think this is an amazing quote. I use it with my students all the time. And so what Feldenkrais is really setting up here is a difference between ontogenetic and phylogenetic evolution, really, and growth. So whereas we're ontogenetic. The human has the capacity to go wrong because you have all of these things that your body and your mind can do, but depending on your conditions, you may not learn them. You may literally go through your entire life without having any idea of like what your body is capable of. Other species, not so much. Like, there are only really specific conditions in which, like, a bird will not learn to fly, right? Or a cat will not learn to hunt. Or, animals learn their capacities. It's kind of part of how they grow. And that is not true for us. Arakawa and Jins in The Architectural Body talk about the ways in which, like, the biome helps us learn things, and how through architecture has now created spaces that make us stupid. It says, like, it stuns us into passivity, right? So how do we really find a way to become capacitous in the way that our intelligent organism is capable of doing, right? And so this is like a way of sort of thinking about building blocks and being like, I don't even understand like the different parts of my body. Like, a lot of people, if you're like, where's your liver? They're like, I don't even know, right? And so because it's been left to chance, and it's been told to you that that's not something that like is necessary for you to function, and that, like, in fact, thinking about something like that would be a distraction from you doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is going to work in order to do the thing, in order to get the thing, in order to get the house, little boxes on the hillside, etc. Right? So in a way, because of our institutions and expertise, systems that are really driven by like capital logic, we have been left to like go wrong, right? Via our capacity to use our bodies. Something that I think about is like the ways in which it's like totally left to chance. Someone may learn it and someone may not. Someone may be exposed to tools even that they can teach themselves, and someone may not. A lot of people, especially based on levels of precarity and access, are maybe totally not exposed to things like this. Something that's amazing to realize is that many people, many people are working in these areas, even though a lot of people may not have access to them, but we do have amazing archives and publications and places to find this stuff. And now, tools in the last couple of decades have been developed that really do integrate the things that we are now capable of seeing and understanding through technology, neuro research, et cetera, with the traditional ways of utilizing the body, things like Qigong or, TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, or working with plants or homeopathy, et cetera, and moving energy through the body. I studied something called quantum touch, which is kind of like related to Reiki, but which really has to do with like being able to isolate and move energy through the body and through other people's bodies. So, but a lot of times these things, like I said, are blocked. They're siloed in specific communities. So like maybe dancers or someone working someone working in yoga or something like may have access to this, but other people may not, or may associate it with communities that they find distasteful in certain ways, which is another problem. So I think that like it's important to realize too that like while practices like yoga or meditation have become really widespread, without kind of an understanding of the internal processes and without thinking about the self as a neuroplastic, without kind of like having this understanding that there is the possibility of reprogramming, it doesn't have the same efficacy as it does to really come at the body with this understanding, with an understanding of what it has been conditioned to do, what you are trying to change. Having that conceptual framework for the work is actually really critical and vital. Though I do think it's interesting. Like, I do think that even if you're doing it as kind of a consumer, if you do yoga every day or you do something like meditation every day, the compound effects of it may kind of ironically be that the body starts to teach you these things, even if you weren't coming at it from that direction. So this is just kind of the beginnings, and it's taken almost 2 months to like really figure out what I wanted to add. And part of the reason is because one of the ways that I've been dealing with quarantine is like realizing that like even though I've been studying and teaching this stuff for a couple of years, like I almost never have the time to spend on somatic practices. And now I've been doing it every day because I feel like there literally is no time like the present, and I must. And so I'm spending my days doing qigong and dancing and moving and body mind centering and learning about the immune system. And I feel like, the things that I'm becoming facile in, or really just I'm a novice in a lot of ways, but the things that are in my vocabulary have already changed me so profoundly. And I know that this is possible for everyone, right? So like whether it is pounding and sounding on your thymus, right, which I've been doing a lot, or whether it's stroking and sweeping your lymphs, or whether it is thinking about and visualizing cellular respiration through and in your blood and moving how that moves from your lungs to your heart to all over your body, all of which have deep and meaningful impacts on the immune system, right? So there's all these things that you can be doing at home. So this is the longest video I've made. There's so much more to come. So figuring out what the next steps are, I really want to work you through some of the like actual mechanics of these biohacks.